Welcome back to another episode of Why Are We Like This, the true crime podcast that treats Florida like the active crime scene it is. I'm David Quinones, and I am joined by my co-host, as always, Tomas Kennedy. Tomas, ¿qué tal?
You know, hanging in there. Surviving Florida.
I feel like we were just on the phone the other day because we literally were just doing an episode the other day. We don't usually have this short of a aperture between our episodes, and so it feels like becoming muscle memory. And if Thomas is on one side of my screen, you guys know who's on the other, our co-host, Gerald Doherty. Gerald, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing okay. The heat was out in my building for a bit. If you're listening to the audio of this, there's no reason for you to know this. But I was worried jumping on this that people would think I was copying Tim Pool by trying to keep warm. But the heat is back on, so I'm okay.
You know, I'm always, when I wear my Miami hat on this episode, and I know we haven't really put out any video of us, we usually focus on the guests, but I'm always worried that people will think that I don't have a majestic head of hair underneath this hat. But like, I really do, guys.
Flexing.
Like I promise.
Flexing.
Yeah. As you guys know. So on our last episode, we talked with Ida Escamani, previewing the upcoming legislative session in Tallahassee, and we touched on the topic of education. Broadly, we have seen and discussed the coordinated efforts to weaken public schools in Florida. And we've gone deep into how proposed legislation like HB1 is aimed at tapping at that rich, tasty vein of public money that's supposed to support our community schools. Instead, it's going to probably end up pumping cash into for-profit charters, ritzy and exclusive magnet programs, school choice initiatives, and even some crackpot homeschool organizations. And again, this was not our first episode on Florida's busted public education system. You can go back in our archives, and I urge you to check out the episodes that we did with Jen Cousins and Jennifer Berkshire. But this week, we're going to dive a little bit deeper with the help of the original reporting of Judd Legum, whose name you probably recognize from founding Think Progress, the website, or more recently from his very successful and always interesting Substack, Popular Information. You can find Popular Information at popular.info, where you should definitely subscribe for his great reporting. Judd, welcome to Why Are We Like This?
Thanks for having me.
So before we jump into that, I just wanted maybe give our listeners an idea. It's Popular Information obviously is not a Florida-based outlet, but it is very often, by dint of its mission, reporting on things that happen in Florida. Maybe you can tell folks what they could expect if they when they subscribe to the Substack.
Yeah, the last few weeks it's been pretty much a Florida newsletter, but yeah, we bounce around the country and around the world, and we're really looking to find places where we think there's gaps in the coverage that you're reading elsewhere, and really focus on trying to hold power to account. You know, whether that's corporations, we do a lot of corporate accountability work, whether that's politicians, like what's going on with DeSantis and the Board of Education and all the issues we're going to talk about today. And looking just for wherever we can make a difference and hopefully shine some light on something that might have otherwise not gotten as much attention. It comes out four times a week. So it comes out Monday through Thursday. And, we try to bring you something new every day.
A lot of stuff, very robust. Again, the website is popular.info, so check it out. But we brought Judd on to talk about something specifically that's been kind of like a brain bug for me since, for a couple of years, but it really kind of drove home, and I've alluded to this, I think, on the podcast before, Tomas and Gerald. I think I told you guys about when we did a community service project with my day job, my work, out in the southern part of Miami-Dade County. We went and refurbished a media center for a Title I school. And it was a lot of fun. It was great. Got paint everywhere and got to do some cool stuff. But one thing that I noticed, this was in August of 2022, some colleagues of mine and I stumbled on the back room of the media center and all the books that had been pulled off the shelves at that point. The biography of a kid, elementary school friendly version of the biography of Malcolm X, an instructional book, a pretty recent instructional book about HIV and AIDS, and a bunch of other stuff like that. And we see these headlines, and it doesn't really, I don't think, sink in until you're literally seeing it happen, like seeing the actual physical books being pulled off of the shelf. And that's what we're going to try to get into with Judd today, specifically in the classroom level. Judd, I'd like to split this conversation into kind of two sections. The first being the story of the pressures that educators are feeling in Manatee County, pertinent to your most recent set of stories on Popular Info, and around the state, and how it's kind of already bearing out in real life, in classrooms, in teachers' lives, and the way that they prepare. And then also to the response of your reporting, specifically how Twitter has used one of its newest features to try to discredit your reporting. But let's begin in Manatee County, which for our non-Floridians is a West Coast central county that's just across Tampa Bay from St. Pete. It's got a population of about 400,000 people. A lot of people who live there work in Tampa or St. Pete, and they commute from Manatee, specifically cities like Bradenton. It's conservative. It's white, whiter than most of Florida, I should say. It votes pretty reliably Republican. So it's one of these Florida counties that's kind of like endless suburbia that bleeds into the rural and citrus country. Judd, how did Manatee County schools wind up on your radar, and where did your reporting take you?
Well, I've been interested, just like what you were talking about with this issue in Florida and around the country, of books being targeted and being pulled out of school libraries, public libraries. And so I'm in touch with activists and people who are really engaged in this issue. There's people who are really devoting, hours and hours, days and days, and they have other jobs to this issue. It's pretty inspiring, actually, how much work people are putting into this. But anyway, one of those groups, one of those activists got in touch with me a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, we're getting a bunch of reports that teachers are being told to, get rid of their classroom libraries.
Yeah.
And, that interested me. One of the things I found is you never quite know what's happening. I didn't know at that point, was this just one administrator who was just very overzealous, maybe some sort of political zealot. I didn't know what was going on. So I started contacting people. What was interesting is some teachers had heard about it and had taken off their classroom, removed their classroom libraries or covered it with a piece of construction paper, things like that. Others hadn't heard about it at all. So I wasn't really sure, but eventually I got in touch with the school district and they confirmed that this was their policy, that all books had to be made inaccessible in classroom libraries until they can be vetted by what in Florida is called a media specialist. In the rest of the world, I guess we call it a librarian.
Yeah.
But in Florida, it's called the media specialist. And so, there's a lot to this, but it all tracks back to a law that was passed in March of 2021, championed by Ron DeSantis, that on its surface kind of seems innocuous because the bill itself says, well, any book in a library or in the curriculum needs to be reviewed by a media specialist, i.e. a librarian, and not just any librarian, one that has this special certification. So it's a limited number of people. You got to go to school. These librarians are serious. They're not messing around. So
right.
they know what they're doing. Now, then what happened was towards the end of the year, the state of Florida, the Department of Education said, when this bill says libraries, they aren't just talking about the main school library. They're also talking about any collection of books, including the classroom libraries. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I've come to learn over the last couple of weeks is that these classroom libraries, at least in Florida, I think it's this way a lot of the country, teachers aren't given any money to create a classroom library. So what teachers do is over years, in some cases decades, they get donations. They're bringing in books from home. They're picking them up wherever they can. And it's like a labor of love. They're curating, like, here's the selection of books that I think will interest this kind of student, that kind of student, maybe somebody who's having trouble with a certain kind of book. This one can get them into it. They're really curating these things.
And they help to fill gaps sometimes.
Yeah,
fill specifically gaps. For that class.
And also, if you talk to the educational researchers, they'll tell you this is actually the most important kind of reading, almost more important than the books that are actually assigned. Because if it's self-directed, that's how kids actually really learn to like to read, because they're following their interests. It's a way they're feeling empowered. And generally that's how people get into it. Definitely tracks with my own experience. You pick up books that you like and you're like, hey, I'm getting something out of this. So anyway, that's what created really the problem, because these libraries are not, the media specialists weren't involved. They weren't trying to hide them for the media specialists, but that's just not how it worked. In fact, some of the teachers, that a teacher retires, a new teacher comes in, the classroom already has the library, they keep adding to it. There's been nobody who's overseen it other than the teachers, because up until this point, we've trusted teachers to make these decisions. But Ron DeSantis and a lot of these activists, like activist groups that have emerged, like Moms for Liberty, there's a variety of others, have perpetuated, and I'll just go ahead and say this is a lie, but they perpetuated this lie that teachers are using these books, and librarians actually too are apparently in on this, to groom children, I guess to exploit them sexually, or to indoctrinate them with leftist ideas.
They call it ideological grooming now.
Yes, ideologically or sexually, one or the other, maybe both. But anyway,
they're kind of. It's funny because it's kind of in the like hive mind. It's kind of become overlapped. I think they've been muddied. Those
it's kind of lumped. It's kind of lumped together, and so it's that premise that's kind of behind all of this, and it's actually more complicated. The whole process is going to be more complicated than just the librarian reviewing it, because what they said in Manatee County, and this is actually in the state of Florida teacher training, is that if you have a book that's not permitted under Florida law, you could be charged with a third-degree felony, and you should err on the side of caution. So, another thing that's a third-degree felony in Florida is manslaughter. So this is like
right on the same level,
they're not. This is not a speeding ticket. This is like something that could essentially ruin your life. That's what they're saying. Ruin your job. That you could lose your job forever and ruin your life. So it's something. Obviously, if you get a communication like this, you're gonna. That's why the libraries were packed up, right? People aren't looking to pick up felony charges. And then, so what's going to happen now is like a two-step process. One is you've got to look up each book and see, is it already in the library? In some cases, it's hundreds of books because people have built these libraries up over years. If it's already in the library, then you're okay. You can put it back. But a lot of these books aren't in the library, because that's the whole point of these classroom libraries, is the teacher is bringing in more variety, different stuff. Those books are going to have to be set aside, and individually, each one is going to have to be reviewed by the librarian and compared against this training that just came out in January, created by the state of Florida. And the training is really insidious, because what it does is, obviously there's a Florida law that says you can't give children pornography. Okay, that makes some sense. I understand why we have a law like that. I don't think there's many, porn.
You're not going to find a strong vocal group who's going to be fighting against that particular.
So that's one thing.
Judd, I wanted to just ask the elephant in the room question here. I think, at least, how is any of this constitutional in the so-called global capital of free speech? How are they getting away with this?
Well, I think a lot of it is not. A lot of it is not. Certainly you can exclude obscenity from libraries, but there's a line of court cases that says, the First Amendment applies to students and applies to school libraries too. And you can't just, remove a book because you don't like its content. There was actually a case, I believe this was in Tennessee. It ended up being a federal case where a school district there decided that students would need to get special permission from their parents to check out Harry Potter books because I guess they're satanic.
I remember this.
Or something like that. And a federal court, not the Supreme Court, but a appeals court said, no, that's unconstitutional because you're doing this based on content. This isn't, the Harry Potter books are not obscene. They don't fit into some, kind of these other narrow categories where you're allowed to exclude it in order to, protect kids. And so therefore, this is a violation of their rights. Right now, we haven't seen litigation yet. Obviously, this is just happening. The training just got put out a week or two ago, this month. I know that the ACLU of Florida is looking at it. It wouldn't surprise me if this gets litigated soon. It hasn't happened yet.
You said the training was put together with input from groups like Moms for Liberty. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. They were there. There were a series of meetings. And in fairness, anybody could come. So there were the other side of this, the activists who are trying to keep. But the Moms for Liberty people got their way, mostly. And the thing that I was going to mention, and this actually speaks right to the Moms for Liberty part and their role in this. Certainly the part about, making sure that in there they get reminded that you can be charged with a felony. But also the two other bills that I'm sure you guys have talked about a lot on this podcast, which is the Parental Rights and Education Act, which is known more commonly as the Don't Say Gay bill, right, and now law, and also the Stop Woke Act, there's been lawsuits filed about that. But those two bills, which, as you know, kind of restrict classroom discussion about gender identity, restrict classroom discussion about race, it says in the bill, this applies to classroom instruction. So it really shouldn't have anything to do with libraries. You should be able to have a book that essentially violates what would be in there if it was part of classroom instruction. But in the training, and this was the Moms for Liberty people, and it's a big push, they really muddy this up in a very intentional way. And they basically just talk about how there's lots of commonalities between the restrictions on libraries and the curriculum. And they say that you can't have any books with unsolicited theories. And then later they start listing the theories, and the theories are the ones in the Stop Woke Act and the ones in the Don't Say. So, it'll be up to, they can't really explicitly say you have to apply this law. In fact, when the DeSantis administration is defending the Don't Say Gay bill, which is also being litigated against, they're saying, oh no, don't worry about it because this only applies to classroom instruction. You could have a book. It's not about library books. Right. So anyway, so that's a big part of it. So now these media specialists, they're getting a purposely vague training that's kind of threatening and also ambiguous. And they're gonna have to look at each book and decide, does this have an unsolicited theory?
And it seems like the muddiness is a feature and not a bug. Like that's intentional. And one thing that struck me in your reporting was also the difficulty, the muddiness that is involved in taking a text and approving it, getting it actually go from the, if it gets sort of kicked out of the classroom, getting that book brought back in seems like an equally daunting situation. So a lot of these classroom libraries that go away, like big chunks of them probably aren't coming back.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge one. We're right in the middle of the school year. So literally, it's not like the teachers are sitting around saying, and the librarians, for that matter, are sitting around saying, we have time to take on a lot of new texts. I mean, they're already people who I would say are overworked and have more responsibilities than certainly anyone could reasonably be expected to do. So yeah, basically these, the school district in Manatee is saying, oh, it's so easy. Just look up your book in the catalog. It's called Destiny, and you look it up, and if it's in there, you can put it back on the shelf. But what they don't tell you is that thousands of books are not going to be in there. These are going to start to pile up, and at the school board meeting that the Manatee County held this week, they admitted no one has time for any of this, and there's no funding to do any of this. So yeah, I think what's going to happen, and maybe this is part of the point, is that many books will be excluded, and also this process will have to be repeated each time a new book is introduced. So whereas before you were already going out trying to get donations, trying to get books, looking at them yourself. Now you're gonna have to get it. It's gonna have to be reviewed by the media specialist. Then it's gonna have to go to a committee of teachers and students and parents who will review the book, and they will decide if they think it's okay. And then even after that, it's gonna have to go to the principal who signs off on it. That's every new book that's going to come into any classroom from now on that's not already been part of the library. So yeah, I mean, it is a huge thing. And actually Manatee, compared to a lot of Florida school districts, is in good shape, because many counties in Florida have eliminated the media specialist position from schools to save money. So there are plenty of schools in Florida, and I think whole school districts, that don't have any media specialists except at the district level. So all the schools are going to be funneling these databases of, book after book after book to, one person who sits at the district level. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. It is a mess. And I think the result of it is going to be Florida students are going to have access to fewer books, which seems pretty crazy.
Yeah, just real quick, on a related note, there was this like fear or uproar over this AP African American Studies class being banned, basically, pulled off the roster last week. And you reminded me of it, because when you were talking about this, this issue of unsolicited topics, right? I'm sure you saw this, Judd, but Education Commissioner Manny Diaz put out a graphic about this African American studies class, basically saying, they say that, we haven't given the reason why we're banning this. Well, here it is. And it's basically the fact that the classroom had like readings by like bell hooks and had like queer theory. Oh my God, and
reasons without reasons.
And references to communist Rosa Parks, and just all kinds of scary stuff. But I mean, I have to go back to, how is any of this constitutional? And how are these so-called defenders of freedom and free speech getting away with this? And do you see, I guess, I mean, obviously there is, but what do you see as the through line between this censorship right from like the elementary, middle school, and high school level, but also reaching into higher education institutions, right? I mean, they are trying to sabotage and reform all of the public education system into right-wing propaganda machine.
Well, let me just, Judd, before you answer that, let me just say really quick, like what T just said, I noticed in your writing, it felt as though, and I'll let you answer the question yourself, but it felt as though everybody who was somewhat either socially or politically aligned with the project, who was on the side of DeSantis, it felt like they were giving you the line where it was like, oh, well, hey, these are the rules. This is just the way that it is. But I don't know, like, because it seems like one of those things where the people who are in favor of it are just like, hands off. Yeah, that's what we have to do. Sorry.
That certainly is the attitude in Manatee County. What they don't tell you, of course, is that, and this is part of this, is that DeSantis, which is pretty unprecedented for a governor, endorsed 16 individual school board members in an effort, and it was fairly successful with this, to sort of remake school boards throughout Florida. 2 of those ended up in Manatee County. And so that's part of why this is being implemented in this way. You could imagine other ways to implement it. But, going back to Thomas's point as well, I do think obviously there is a through line through all of this. There's different ones, but I think, one of them is just the erasure of LGBTQ people from any school, and that was cited to get rid of this AP history class. And, some of my previous reporting has focused more on individual books, because there are either parents or teachers or other people, some of whom are challenging hundreds, even thousands of books. And a lot of the objections are just to books that just have a character that either, is gay or might be gay. I mean, one of the books that comes up over and over again is this book called And Tango Makes Three.
Mhm.
It's about 2 male penguins, and they like each other. It's not a sex book. The penguins don't do anything. They just like hanging out. And the zookeeper notices this and gives them a little, like, baby chick, an egg that's been abandoned or something, and they raise this little penguin.
It's based on a real situation.
It's
right?
based on a real
Based on a real situation. So those are the kind of books that are being targeted. And in fact, there are school districts, and Manatee is one of these, that on an administrative level are taking these books, not even based on a complaint, are taking a book like Entango X3 and other kind of innocuous, books, and removing them from school libraries, either just on their own or on the basis of, just like a random email from the local Moms for Liberty, activists. So that's a big part of it. And I think the real tragedy of it is like the people who are going to suffer from this are the students. If you don't have access to all the different AP classes, that helps you get into college. It can help make college cheaper because you can get some credit. It can obviously be on your resume. Now, there may be other AP classes, but you might be interested in taking the African American history exam, and helping in getting study for that. So that's I think the tragedy of it. So I think people are starting to see this was all billed under parents' rights, and that's what we're talking about, parents' rights. A lot of it is not being driven by parents, and we're starting to see that this is more about demonizing teachers than empowering parents.
And you've noted that this is coming at a time, correct me if the figure is wrong, where while we're creating a backlog of which books students may read and which ones they may not, only about 50% of Manatee County students are reading at grade level in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. I mean, this is a county where kids, need to read. I mean, obviously that's not necessarily like an indictment of what's going on. It's challenging to get kids up to speed, especially after, the pandemic, which disrupted a lot of folks. But this is something where it's important that there is an issue with literacy. And as I mentioned, this is in that, I'm sort of talking about it like I'm some sort of expert. I'm not, but I have kind of gotten into this area of like classroom libraries, in the last couple of weeks, and people, they are really important, especially if there's a kid who, might be struggling, but is learning to read. If you can find, maybe you've got some baseball books, or maybe they're into dance or whatever, and there's books that you have that maybe aren't in the library because they're not great works of literature, but there's something that interests the kid because that's what they're interested in, and you kind of get them going. So I think that's part of what's happening there. And I hope that as in future school board elections and other elections that bear on these issues, that we have hopefully at least a more informed conversation about what's really, going on, rather than just like it's the people who, are trying to indoctrinate the kids versus the people who want to empower parents. I mean, it's just a very reductionist view. And now, unfortunately, students are starting to pay the price here.
And Judd, because our lens is so Florida centric as Floridians in the eye of the storm, but your work takes on a is on a national scope, and as you said in the beginning of this podcast, sometimes even on a global scope. I wanted to ask, have you seen anything like this in any other place in the United States, or this sort of like censorship regime taking place?
I think the difference, it's happening. There are other places where it's happening. And one of the interesting things, since this particular story, and it's interesting when I write 4 things a week. This one I put out on Monday, and it was like it exploded. Like people really were like worked up about it, which I understand. But I get worked up about a lot of things, and then sometimes people don't get so worked up. But this one hit with people, and I've just been flooded with people all around the country who are talking about similar things that are going on in their community. People trying to ban books, people trying to censor what's being on in classrooms. The difference, I think, that's in Florida, the only other state that's, I would say, somewhat similar is Texas, is that the political leadership, kind of from top to bottom in most cases, is all aligned with these efforts and is supporting these efforts. They're passing laws. They've taken control of the school boards, and they're implementing this really aggressively. There's other places. I'm actually going to write about. I'll give you this a little special preview for why we are like this, listeners. But I'm going to be talking about what's going on in Michigan in my newsletter on Monday. And it's interesting there because it's the opposite. They tried to do all this stuff. Tudor Dixon, who ran for governor, really ran to be, kind of bring DeSantis-style politics to Michigan. She was going to have their own "Don't Say Gay" bill. They were going to get these books out of schools. She lost. The people who were running for the legislature lost. The people who were running for the school board lost. So in Michigan, the same activists, the same right-wing activists are trying to do this, but they're using totally different and really very sneaky tactics in Michigan. And I'm going to write about that on Monday. But in Florida, you don't have to be sneaky, because in Florida, the law, they've now got the law, they've got the Department of Education, they've got the school boards. And so that's why you're seeing such aggressive action being taken, and it's not duplicated a lot of other places for that reason.
I mean, our education commissioner is basically a charter school lobbyist who has spent his time as a state senator passing policies to enrich again the charter school industry at the behest of public schools. And now we just did an episode on it. I'm sure you're following it as well. The one of the flagship bills this legislative session in Florida is a bill that's going to transfer over $2 billion of public school funds into private schools. So this is just an all-out assault on not just free speech, but the public education system as a whole.
Yeah, I do think that's what and I think sometimes it's easy to dismiss sort of these grand theories that are linking everything up together. But yeah, you're right. When they introduce a bill and it's called HB1, and that's the one for this session that's going to do this massive transfer of funds, I don't think it's a stretch to say part of this is about the delegitimization of public schools. And if what they were saying about public schools were true, then you'd want to get kids out of them. I mean, if the librarians and the teachers were all in cahoots with each other, trying to indoctrinate children with, I don't know what, with these pornographic books, then I guess maybe you'd want to find like an alternative. But fortunately, this is not something that is happening. I mean, this is something that was made up. What did happen is a librarian, the job of a librarian, and a teacher for that matter, is, hey, let's have books that can appeal to lots of different types of kids, and that maybe can make them feel a little less alone, or something, connect with their own feelings and things they're going through. So they get all kinds of books, including books, because gay people exist, about that have LGBTQ characters in them. Like, you wouldn't want to exclude those books. So that's all that's happening. I mean, it's not the idea that they're introducing these books because they want to turn kids into, change their sexuality in some way. I mean, it's absurd. These are people who've devoted their whole life to trying to create a selection of books that are good for kids. I mean, I don't think becoming a librarian is not the path you go for fame or riches. Is because you actually really care. You love books and you care about kids. I mean, and demonizing these folks, I think, is it's really beyond the pale.
You're going to get our podcast canceled in Florida going around saying stuff like gay people exist, man. Come on, what's wrong with you? You gotta
you cannot play this podcast in a Florida classroom. Punishable by a 3rd-degree felony.
I know.
Tomas, this is that thing that you're always talking about, that you're always banging on, which is like this conservative project where it's like, let's take the thing that's publicly funded, make it work like shit, and then say, like, look at how bad government does X, Y, and Z. I mean, this is just probably like the apotheosis of this. Is just like the biggest example, I think, right now. Obviously prioritized HB1, like you say, right? Like, they do this with everything, right?
I mean, yeah, they did it with the Florida's unemployment system. They did it with public education. They've done it with healthcare. It's, like again, we talked about it in the last episode. It's Ronald Reagan's famous quote. I'm here from the worst thing you can hear is I'm here from the government and I want to help, right? They sabotage public institutions. They erode the public trust in public institutions. And then they privatize it all, sell it to the highest bidder. And they still do everything like shit. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like we're getting a better product out of it.
Look, you guys know I'm a public school parent, and like that is the net effect, man. When I talk to just regular, not perennially online freaks and weirdos like us, but just normal regular people, normal regular public school parents, the impression broadly is, ugh, what a mess. I don't know. I'm looking into charter schools, and that's exactly the point. That is what they want. They want you making consumer decisions based on they want you to think of your neighborhood public school or your neighborhood community school as a morass, a mess, some weird political shit happening there. Maybe your kid's getting groomed, who knows? And like, let me not mess with that. I'm gonna go take these vouchers and take my money and go
David,
someplace else.
You know what they're also doing it with? Just real quick, you know what they're also doing it with? They're doing it with the prison system. Why do you think Geo Group and all these for-profit prison companies, are lobbying lawmakers, right, you know what I mean, to ingratiate themselves, in the political process? They take funds away from public prisons. They make them absolute hellholes, and then all the resources go into these private prison institutions. And not just private prison institutions, but private immigration detention centers as well. You know how many times doing my, the work that I do in immigration and actually in criminal justice, I have heard from people that have been in these institutions that I would much rather be in a Geo Group jail than a public prison, because it's true. These institutions are better funded and conditions are better, right? But that's because, again, the public prisons and public facilities have been defunded and actually sabotaged at the expense of these for-profit prisons. And of course, the prison system is, problematic as a whole. But you know what I mean? When you're putting a for-profit, motive to jailing people, that is inherently, like wrong, and it's going to lead to
perverse. Yeah,
results.
It's terrible.
So we should have another whole episode on that specific topic.
We should.
But this project has gotten so absurd and out of control that they're even privatizing, our prison system.
I think the other kind of dynamic here, and I'd be interested to see polling or something like that, but I can't imagine that, when parents see, books in their kids' classrooms covered over with a blanket, or, pulling out and Tango Makes Three, that's, kind of broadly, popular politically. But I think DeSantis is really thinking more about how do you galvanize and raise your profile nationally among the typical Republican presidential primary voter. Right. So no matter what the backlash is in Florida, it's not really necessarily, I think, the target audience for some of this stuff. There's certainly people in Florida who like it. I mean, there's these activists and things like that, but I don't think it's an area where they're really taking the temperature of the people of Florida or the people of the schools and things like that. I think you're looking at what's a very small percentage of even the Republican Party that's going to be active in early primary states and raising your profile and showing you're willing to take this on. It was kind of this strategy, I think, was really launched by Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, who played it off, and his approach, I would say, was obviously he was just a candidate at that point, so he wasn't passing laws, and he has been somewhat more subtle about the implementation of it. But I think this is seen as savvy Republican politics.
Brinksmanship kind of. Yeah, being able to say, like, look at how we talked about it before, right, Chair? Like, look at how based I am.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
wow.
To Judd's point, like, for every parent he loses in Manatee County, he'll pick up 2 primary voters in Des Moines, Iowa. Like, that, I think, is the strategy. Like, this will alienate parents in Manatee. He's not after those parents. He's trying to play to a national audience, because this is going to get plaudits from all the people he's trying to impress, regardless of how the parents actually feel about, like you said, someone saying, not just I'm from the government, I'm here to help. I'm from the government. Take me to your children's library. Which is very interesting, because I grew up in a very Reagan Republican household, and my dad always said the reason he hated liberals was because they think that a state bureaucrat can run your life for you. And now you're in a situation where, as long as that bureaucrat is an epic right-wing culture warrior, that is exactly what they think. Like, as long as the bureaucrat is one of us, they should absolutely be making decisions for you.
Yeah, it's interesting too that I think this was DeSantis gave a speech. I can't remember if it was the State of the State speech or if he was just giving a speech because he had won re-election. But presenting Florida as this beacon of freedom, while at the same time there's really no state that is so aggressively using its power, state power, to restrict speech. And it goes. We're in individual classrooms now, but we're also in the Stop Woke Act, which is, prohibits you from talking about things that might, make someone feel guilty about their race or things like that.
Yeah.
That also applies to private businesses. I mean, I think the judge, the last I've read, has put a hold on that for right now temporarily, but he's the intent is to say that you can only, even if you have a private business, you can't give certain kinds of trainings to your employees because we don't like those trainings. I mean, this is taking things to an entirely new level. And I do think it's part of DeSantis showing that he is willing to go farther and cross more red lines than anyone else, in order to defeat the woke mind virus.
The woke mind virus. I want to move on to that. I want to, because I know we only have a few minutes left, and before we close out with you, like, I want to talk about probably the most the platform that is owned by the most prominent purveyor of the idea that there is a woke mind virus. And what other platform would we be talking about but Twitter? You did this reporting earlier this week, so let's talk about the response that it got, along with all of the parents who reached out to you, and or all the people who have been affected by this issue. You also got a pretty strong reaction on social media. Can you explain how you found yourself a subject or a victim of Twitter's so-called community notes, and exactly, maybe for those who don't know what that is, who haven't stumbled across them, exactly what the fuck a community note is?
Yeah, I hadn't seen a lot of them myself, honestly, until this happened. But yeah, as I mentioned, I put out something 4 days a week. Sometimes people are interested, sometimes they're not. This one, and I usually, after I publish it, goes out primarily as a newsletter, but I'm on Twitter and I'll give a little summary and kind of give people a little sense of what's in there. I did that for this story about Manatee, and it took off, so it was getting, I don't know what it had eventually, but 10,000 retweets. It was reaching a few, several million people according to Twitter stats. And then I started having a few people send me, hey, there's this note that's now appended. And so what was happening is there was a note that said my reporting, which we talked about, that these teachers were required to put a blanket over their books or make them inaccessible in another way, or risk a felony, that essentially that was potentially misleading because they were not being required to remove all books. They were only being required to remove unvetted books, and basically a little paragraph that makes it seem like I'm full of shit. I mean, that was the
Yeah.
purpose of this note. And it's something. This is a feature that's really been touted by Elon Musk, and he's also been clear that, and it's community moderated, meaning I don't know how you get involved, but there's a bunch of people who are looking at
designated.
they're looking at tweets, not Twitter employees, kind of volunteers. They're looking at tweets, and then they're writing notes, and then they kind of randomly display them, and then people start voting on it. And if you get enough votes one way or the other, they start displaying it more. So at a certain point, it was getting displayed all the time. And Musk has said that, other platforms that work like this have a right-wing bias. Wikipedia is his example. And that this is going to be, that they're working nonstop to make sure that it's not going to turn into Wikipedia. It's going to be fair, but, more, I guess, more fair to the right.
Wikipedia, co-founded by Larry Sanger. And if you don't know who Larry Sanger is, just go check out his Twitter feed if you want to get an idea for the ideological leanings of the person that co-founded Wikipedia. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, I wrote another thread complaining about this note, and I think that thread helped a bit, because I think what happened is, as people became aware of it, and they understood my reporting and the fact, like, I had spent a lot, as I said, I got all these things. The teachers were telling me things. I could have just gone off what the teachers were saying, but I was like,
what was the factual quibble that they were trying to say?
They were trying to say that all the books don't have to be removed, because once a book is vetted, it can be put back on. But the problem is, when the policy is announced, as I explained, all the books are unvetted.
Yeah.
So the first thing you have to do is take all your books, offline.
Right.
I never said that every book was permanently banned from every. I mean, that would have been ridiculous. Like, obviously, there's going to be books in Florida classrooms, and some of these books are going to be back in the classroom libraries. But it doesn't make it any less, insane of what's going on. So I think after I did the thread explaining why this was incorrect, maybe some more people voted and said this was not helpful. This is not a helpful note. So then it got displayed less and less, and I think today it's not really getting displayed. But I do think that it shows the direction that Twitter is going, and the fact that, this there's not a lot of these notes around, but this tweet that I had done, this thread, which was showing the real implications of what DeSantis was doing to Florida. And Musk is a open supporter of DeSantis, saying that if he runs in 2024, that's the guy he's going to support. Right. That's what's getting targeted by this community notes, feature. And if that community note had stuck around, I mean, the reason why they have these is they've done, studies inside Twitter that if you have a community note, it gets retweeted less, it gets seen less, it gets less interaction.
It throttles the performance.
Yeah, because most people are just, they're not going to, it's a complicated issue. They're just going to see, oh, looks like, this is not right. So I'm not going to, I don't want to be associated with it, when actually I had spent a ton of time, I was very worried about the idea that this could be wrong. And so I spent, literally 2 days just calling and tried to get the district to talk to me and everything else until I got it absolutely nailed down. I was on the phone with the chief of staff of the school district, who told me, yes, this is exactly what's happening. So I knew I was right. Which got me all, exercised, which is not totally untypical for me, but I was very exercised because I had worked hard on this story. But I think it does raise additional concerns if there weren't enough already about the direction that Twitter is going.
So, Tomas, Gerald, would the two of you be surprised to learn that a story about a controversial story about public education in Florida that dealt with teachers eventually turned into conservative officials shitting on public school teachers? Would you guys be shocked if I told you that that's what ended up happening just mere, I think, days after you published this, right, Judd?
Yeah, it was the next evening. They had the meeting, and it was really driven by these two DeSantis-endorsed school board members. And essentially, they were just asking a bunch of questions like, well, you never really told the teachers that they had to cover up their books, right? You never really told them they had to turn around their bookcases or cover them up with paper. Like, they were just upset. And, you know, the school district, while kind of dancing around answering these questions, I mean, at a certain point, they're like, no, you know, we never told them you got to get rid of all of the books or you've got to put them all away. We never told them that. That was not true, you know, and I think it's really a matter of, you know, the story came out, it got some negative attention. It started, you know, get moving around Twitter. It was getting, you know, CNN was writing a story. It's getting national press now. And they were trying to turn this around and say, actually, you know, we just put in these reasonable policies to follow the law. And the implication was it was the teachers that overreacted. But what I had was a document that was sent to me by a number of teachers that actually said, I didn't have this actually at the time that I published my original story, so I didn't put it in the original story. But I had gotten it by then, that said, you must either remove or make inaccessible all of the books in your classroom library until they've all been reviewed. The document is actually even stricter than what they're sort of saying and how I think the policy is being implemented, where once you start verifying that they're also in the library, you can get them back in. And so, yeah, I mean, the school board members were turning around and blaming this on the teachers when they were just doing exactly what they were told under the punishment of a third-degree felony, you know. And then secondly, the school district was being very dishonest about it. What they should have said when they're asked, you know, did you tell them to put the books away? They should have said, yes, we told them to put the books away, because that's exactly what they did, you know. And it just shows, I think, what people think they can get away with, especially when it's in these kind of random, you know, school board meetings where they don't think anyone's really paying attention, who's following closely. And, you know, it's kind of gross, to be honest.
They are creating, not only they don't have to say anything, because they are creating this atmosphere of fear and intimidation where people are not just afraid of losing their jobs now, but they're actually afraid of getting hit, like, with not even a misdemeanor, a freaking felony. I mean, of course this is what's going to happen, you know, and of course that, you know, teachers are going to err on the side of caution. And actually, you said it in this interview right at the beginning that, like, teachers were, you know, told to err on the side of caution when it comes to these new guidelines.
Yeah. And this is something I know just from speaking to a lot of teachers and then also getting messages from other students, other people. I mean, I actually had a student text me and saying that he watched his teacher literally in tears as she was, you know, kind of packing up her classroom library. So the idea that this is teachers sort of just seeking attention and trying to make a political issue of it is totally wrong. This is the last thing the teachers want to do. They do not want to do this. They feel like they're forced to do it. And I think I think that they're absolutely right to feel that way, because that's what they're being told. And you've got it. I mean, these people, Ron DeSantis, the Florida Board of Education, the people on the school boards who are they are serious. You know, I would not assume that they're just that this third-degree felony thing is a head fake. I mean, Ron DeSantis arrested a bunch of people for voting when they were told by the state of Florida that they were eligible to vote. I mean,
for voting legally.
Yeah, we don't want to. I mean, I don't want to get into like a whole other topic with 2 minutes left to go in this podcast. But the point being that they are right to take these people seriously, because I don't think they would say, oh yeah, we're talking about the third, but we wouldn't actually do it. They would do it if they felt like they could make an example of someone.
Absolutely.
So this whole realm of what's happening in education is moving fast, as Judd mentioned. Like, there's really no guardrails left. There's nobody stopping the Republican full control of the situation. So it's something that we're going to keep an eye on going forward. But in the meantime, I want to thank our guest, Judd Legum, who is the author of Popular Information. Again, you can subscribe over at popular.info. Judd, where else can people find you and follow you?
On Twitter at Judd Legum. Legum, and then I'm also at that same account now on Mastodon, just in case Twitter kicks me out or starts appending too many notes to me. You can find me there.
That's all for this episode of Why Are We Like This? Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts for more episodes, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Visit us at wawlt.com. Follow us on Twitter at Wolt Show. And on TikTok at Wolt Show. You can also email us at wolt@allpointswest.net. Until next time, this was Why Are We Like This? Wolt Mafia Rising.